Please welcome to the stage Michael Tichy. The Clint Eastwood of indie horror?
Not the bad parts. Like, 30 years ago.
Not the politics.
I'll be reading from Behind Every Tree, Beneath Every Rock, which is strangely for sale, but from the building. Alright. This is my first public appearance. Edwin's taller than me. Alright. Waking in the near dark, one eye welded shut and thick with dried and drying blood, the other casting ghostly images of Ben and of boots. Alex tries to take an inventory of injuries, but gives up at the sheer scale of the task. Ribs feel like loosely bundled sticks, and there is a crackle on the left side when he draws breath. Minutes pass while he summons the courage to try to stand, and his right ankle sings a sharp protest when he puts weight on it, even as his head swims as soon as he is upright. He inches his way to the cabin and finds it looking pretty much how he feels. Someone has taken a knife to the chair, and from the smell of it, urinated in here as well. The table is on its side with broken legs, the mattress is shredded and blankets torn, but still usable for someone as desperate as him. By some miracle, Dad's whiskey remains intact, lying on its side just behind the chair. His CPAP is in pieces, and he thinks he might die in his sleep between the apnea and whatever is happening in his chest. Fuck it. He uncorks the bottle and lets the amber sting his throat and gut. He doesn't remember finishing the bottle until the hollow thunk of it hitting the floor rouses him as he mindlessly shifts and stretches in the broken light of dawn through the doorway. His body has long been a warehouse to illness and injury, waking a process of checking in, listening to what speaks most loudly that day. First, a deep breath. He finds to his surprise his lungs neither shrink from the apparent broken ribs nor from the scarring that has been present much longer. There is no crackle. The air is sweet and slightly wet, and he can feel it expand into his belly. There is no pain there either, no hint of the soft tissue damage he's certainly sustained. Flexing and extending arms and legs, wrists and ankles, fingers and toes, and finally his neck, he finds a suppleness so long absent as to seem utterly alien. For a moment he thinks he must be dead. And if this is the world of the dead, then it is a welcome relief from that of the living. He stands slowly, anticipating the wave of dizziness he has grown accustomed to, maybe worse with the concussion from the night before. Instead, his legs feel strong under him. Yes, he must be dead. Vision is still blurry on the left side, and his face is tacky to the touch, but not tender. And when he finds a bottle of water and pours and rubs at the area, his eyesight returns. If anything, it seems sharper than before. Clothes are torn and muddy, streaked white and dusted red in places from the mushrooms. One pant leg is dusted with his father's remains. He pats at it, and it comes off in a cloud that swirls in the light for longer than seems natural. Red spores mixed with ash seem to encircle him, and he thinks he probably shouldn't breathe it, but it expands as it dissipates. It tastes of deeply dug, wet soil, and where it lands on exposed skin, it disappears, leaving tiny freckles behind. Then, like a spell broken, the whole mass spins and breaks in a decaying orbit. It's a tickle in his nostrils, face, hands, a meteor storm that breaks on him and is gone. He wonders in that moment if a planet can feel, and if this is what that's like. If gravity is just a soul drawing what it needs to it. Again, a thought that seems to come from elsewhere. Beyond the itch in his throat and the echo of a faint whisper on his skin, beyond and below that, is a strength purging up from some long-forgotten well in him. It is not the cold of deeply drawn water, of the wind that follows it that he feels, but a heat that sings its way across his hollows, rising through the marrow of his bones. Suffused with a feeling so remote that the memory of it is too faint and distorted to properly recollect, and he has no choice but to be present for it, and for the sense of wholeness it leaves in its wake. He realizes then, hiding in abstraction for so long, the subtle miracle of living flesh. When he exits the cabin, bouncing from foot to foot, it is with no destination in mind, but rather to play, to feel the crunch of nettle and leaf underfoot. The impulse to run toward the stream is so natural, so close he doesn't think for even a moment that something may be calling him there. Barefoot, it is as if each footfall was already there, waiting for him to fill its space, to embrace him and then release him for the next step. It is a gentle rise through the trees, the trickle of water audible on the other side. Everything so clear. He doesn't slow for the climb, but rather quickens his pace, lungs filling with nourishing air, heart pumping a steady thrum in his chest. Sun trickles through the foliage and the light is electric on his skin. It is only on approaching the stream that he begins finally to sense an other, a presence so vast that it fills the space around him, and so small it hides from every attempt to pinpoint it. He knows then that something moves here that is much older than clumsy speech. He pauses and watches a wave of flickering leaves moving up all the trees at once, and knows the land breathes just as he does. It defies his eyes and his reckoning because these have grown shackled to words. He feels for a moment an idea on the tip of his tongue, then it collapses and he understands it is beyond him. He can feel it in bands of color that move around and through and occasionally seem to resolve into something, like a cloud long stared at. Finally able to surrender to that, thought seems to stop entirely. When he emerges, it is to a sight familiar and strange. It seems like the same stream of yesterday, but more tortuous, and where he remembers a mossy and decaying stump on which he would lay and daydream as a child, there is instead a great gnarled oak. Velvety green carpets around and partly up its sides, and those white mushrooms pockets every visible surface. Above eye level, all is dark under its dense branches and broad leaves. He steps closer and his foot sinks to the ankle in the mud. It seems the moss moves up his leg, a gentle tugging. He thinks that closer to the tree a root might provide a stable point from which to withdraw his foot, but stepping where he was sure a root would be, his other foot sinks. This keeps going nearly to the knee, then, stuck as he is, he can feel himself pitching forward toward the trunk. He finds himself instead falling into a void in the bowl, not apparent until he passes through the moss draping over it. Legs slipping from the mud, he is tumbling head over heels down a broad and slick tunnel. He comes to a rest, sticky and wet in the cavern. From the roots that mingle with the stone and earthen walls, he must be directly under the tree. Weak points of light come from other tunnels, mingle to give the space a soft glow. He has come to rest on a thick carpet of moss and fungus. In the center, water gathers and drips dissonant in a shallow pool. One wall is nearly covered by a painting, a crude rendition of an elk, antlers stretching and branching like roots growing upward, capillaries carrying energy upwards. Alex tries to follow one of the paths from base to tip and keeps getting lost, having to start over. The image defies the tidy illusions of beginning and end. He thinks of the diner, but instead of the chilled image set in him, there is only awe. Was it ever a living, breathing thing, hunter's exaggeration of their greatest feat, or just something conjured in flickering firelight, an expression of fear and reverence, mingling like bone and charcoal on the wall? Alex makes himself small beneath it, a supplicant. Were it living, he would be under its hooves, and the image is infinite from his perspective, towering above him with malign grace. He strains his ears to listen to what whispering echo might remain of it, and finds in its stillness a judgment. Every step he has taken, even those in his stead before he was yet thought or breath, even up to the last few that brought him here, each was a step further from the divine. Grit and guano dig into his knees, already aching and bending so acutely, and it's as time itself is speaking in the only language time knows, pain. His pantomime of humility is far too little, far too late. The water seems louder, a hard and slow arrhythmia. He wants to take the broken void of the place, of its God, into him, and his wish is a prayer, no less binding for being thought rather than speech. To carry this inside him, to be possessed of it, to even be displaced, might be some measure of amnesty, or at least a turn toward a course less damning and futile than the one he has been on for all his life. Fetid and cool, the air is wet with animal rot, and a deep well of contempt that bubbles in the ground below. He makes his way to the pool, and the face that stares back at him is not his own, but each sees a part of themselves in the other, the desperation, bitterness, anger born of diminishment. It had felt its influence fading for a measurable time, but accelerating more recently. A fibrous malignancy clung to its insides and drew it back each time it tried to push itself out. Its body, its world, was getting smaller and smaller. Very soon there might be no maneuver left to it. It might be the last of its kind, and this its last chance. But better to fall than to fade. For Alex, his quiet prayer is answered with a terrible thirst, and he reaches into the pool, scoops palmful after palmful of water into his mouth. It sloshes in his empty stomach, and still he drinks. Warmth spreads through him, warmer, hot. His vulnerability, their vulnerability, all the words and events that made him small, kept him small, they are loosed, small rocks set to tumble down a mountain, aggregating into a juggernaut, breaking everything in its path until it finally comes to a rest when there is nothing left to destroy. Filled with the images, thirst finally slaked, he falls into a deep sleep. Dreams of vastness, mycelium and root networks that span the mountainside. He feels these bodily. His circulatory and nervous systems are those of the earth. Everything is in perfect communication. A tree lacking nutrients gets them shuttled from elsewhere, and then he feels that failing. The ground is too dry in places, his skin scorched by something poured out on it. Parasites carve pieces from him and then salt the wounds. He can feel himself diminishing past the point where he will be able to sustain what was once a perfectly balanced whole. He can feel his senses failing first at the extremities, but it is a creeping numb that makes him smaller and smaller. Suffocating darkness slowly overtakes him.
Come on, Michael! Yeah!